Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Roberto Alvarez. I'm the Executive Director of the GFCC. The GFCC, it's a global multi-stakeholder organization. We have members that are universities, corporations, government agencies, and private sector entities and councils like industry chambers, councils on competitiveness, and alike. One of the things that we've been doing over the years is to convene leaders from across those sectors to talk about issues related to innovation, competitiveness, value creation, and prosperity. We're here today for another one of those conversations. We're talking future-proofing university education and innovation systems. We have leaders joining us from the United States, from Qatar, from Luxembourg, from Greece. And as we always do, we mix sectors and we do that at a global scale. It's really a pleasure to be here with you today. I will be moderating the session and I invite all of you to share your thoughts and your questions. We want really you to be part of this conversation. Today, we have here Ted Zoller, who's the director of the Entrepreneurship Center at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Ted, if you could wave, maybe it's a good way for people to know who you are. We have Jimmy Choi, who's the Vice President of Knowledge Enterprise at Arizona State University. Hi, Jimmy, great to have you here. We have Maher Hakim, who's the Chief Advisor of Innovation and Enterprise at Qatar Foundation, the Qatar Research Development and Innovation Council. And Maher is also affiliated with the UC Berkeley with the Citrus Innovation Hub. We have Pranjul Shah, who's the head of the University of Luxembourg Incubator. Maher and Pranjul, in addition to their capacities in policy and university, are also entrepreneurs who have co-founded tech companies. Pranjul, great to have you here. Maybe if you could wave to everybody, that would be great. And we have also joining us a GFCC corporate member from Greece, Georgia Murlan. Georgia is the Deputy Chief Officer, Issuer Relations at the Athens Stock Exchange. We have been working with the ATEX group in several initiatives. It's great to have you here, Georgia. Vanessa in the GFCC is helping us to run this session. So maybe Vanessa, if we could just get started. I think we are. Great to see you. Thank you so much. So there are three things that are happening in the globe now. We all know that we're going through a time of accelerated transformation. The pandemic has catalyzed that. We know that universities were deeply affected and the scenario continues to change. We've been working in the GFCC with universities since 2016 when we created the GFCC University Research Leadership Forum that gathers university leaders, presidents, and vice presidents from more than 15 countries. We started the forum because we understand that universities are growth engines in the knowledge economy. But university models are changing. Universities are more and more mingling with other sectors. The boundaries between universities and governments, universities and industry are becoming blurred. And the third thing is that innovation itself is changing today. The way we create new things, that way we create new solutions that deliver value to society, that is changing. I think that we all can realize how fast it was to develop new vaccines for COVID-19. Innovation models, research, development models are changing. So how do those things connect? What could we do to accelerate the translation of knowledge into economic value? Universities are key players around the globe, driving innovation ecosystems and exploring, developing, creating new models to engage with industry, government, and society. This is the conversation that we're here today. And the way we'll do it is first, as I said, we want this to be an inclusive conversation. So please share your comments and questions using the chat function here on Zoom. And please join us for the conversation. To get started, I would like to invite our colleague Ted Zoller for some initial remarks. Last week with GFCC members, we had an amazing presentation that Ted and his team made. Ted has created a resource that we'll be sharing with GFCC members at the GFCC community on mega trends affecting the higher education business models. But Ted, in addition to capturing those trends, you are an entrepreneur and you have been training entrepreneurs. You have been working with innovation ecosystems around the globe. So in that context, what are the changes that you see? How will innovation and how universities engage in that space change in the years to come? Over to you, Ted.
Thank you so much, Roberto. I want to credit GFCC and Roberto's team for putting this on the agenda, because we're going to see an accelerated degree of change in the higher education marketplace. If you consider higher education an industry, I think it's an industry that will be going through the same disruption we might have seen in journalism, for instance, or in retail commerce. The same thing is coming our way in higher ed. And either we have a simple choice: we can embrace it or we can ignore it. And if we ignore it, it'll be to our peril. The three trends that are outlined in the study that GFCC invited us to develop are quite extraordinary. First, seamlessness. Seamless opportunities to bring residential, our traditional university research and innovation and learning environments in a parallel online environment. So you'll see that online environment now reflected in a parallel residential environment. We see amazing trends in syndication, new partnerships that are now being developed well past co-authoring ties and partnerships, new models that will merge and actually define the blurry space between, as Roberto said, between the higher education institutions and other partners, both public and private. And then the third trend is singularity. I'm a big fan of Ray Kurzweil, and while his concepts were abstract, 5-10 years ago, think about the way we were talking about when we were talking about Moore's Law back in the 80s. I think singularity is actually starting to unfold much faster than we ever thought, that the human-computer interface will actually now blend and create new models for us all to consider in higher ed. We looked at both education and innovation. And on the education side, we saw three important trends. First, massification. Massification means there's a democratization of new learners. We're seeing extraordinary growth in enrollments, but specifically focused on new ways of learning. We're seeing the highest growth in Asia in both the upper secondary and the post-secondary education markets. This is driven by mobility, and that mobility is global in nature. And that's driven by the preparation and search for talent. The second trend is around the student experience. We're going to see substantial change in the way universities operate. Obviously, new technology is coming to fore, learning innovations, the advent of machine learning, virtual reality, augmented reality, AI. And this translation and transition has been accelerated by the pandemic, I think faster than we all anticipated. Even professors that are in the boomer generation are having to jump on the online wagon. The third trend is a change in credentialing. We're seeing new credentials being developed well past the models of our disciplinary structure now. The concept of degrees are now being broken up, new types of credentialing strategies, open learning, stackable credentials, competency-based learning. All this is now developing a platform. These three trends, massification, student experience, and credentialing, are leading higher education into new sets of partnerships. This is being mirrored on the research and innovation side, and we're seeing extraordinary changes. For instance, the Council of Competitiveness just announced a new initiative to encourage a 10x-fold increase in research innovation. And that's going to be not only in innovations developed, but in the velocity of research and new communities engaged to enhance diversity in research. The technology behind it is driven from cloud-based architectures, big data, machine learning, AI. And we're seeing, like Roberto said, evidence from the COVID-based crisis-triggered innovation system that we've now taken vaccine development down from 15 years to 1.5 years. This is having huge implications on the higher education business model, because now we're seeing research in a very high velocity, high throughput model that streamlines bureaucracy, creates new collaborations and forms and models, enhance transparency with shared data sets and findings, and then new analytical tools to increase the throughput of research. So we're moving, I think, Roberto, and I'll conclude here, from the paradigm of tech transfer to translation. What is the human impact of innovation? So these are trends that we must engage, we must embrace, and we realize are going to substantially change the way higher education is operated in the last century. But I'm very excited about where this translation will take us, because it could lead to higher new forms of learning and accelerated innovation in learning strategies. So I'll turn it back to you, Roberto.
Thank you, Ted. And you just mentioned the Council on Competitiveness, a GFCC founded member, and really the member that has spearheaded the inception of the GFCC, their new report, Competing in the Next Economy. For those who are interested on that, if you check our chat here, our colleague Chad Evans, Executive Vice President of the Council on Competitiveness, has just shared a link for that resource. And for GFCC members, next week we're having our monthly call with members and fellows from across the globe. We are happy to have Chad joining and presenting in that session about the report that Ted has just mentioned. Talking about that initiative, I want to turn to you, Jimmy, because I think that when we last met before the pandemic, it was at ASU on January 16, 2020, because ASU was hosting the U.S. Council Commission on Future Innovation. And as you can see, I wear glasses. And I want to thank, let's say, ASU students who have just created and won the X Prize for the anti-fog mask. I'll be very happy to use that device. And having said that, how do you do that to nurture entrepreneurship and innovation, connecting students and connecting your research capabilities, but also going beyond the university boundaries? Well, I think ASU is known for being #1 for the most innovative university in the United States. How do you do that in practice?
Roberto, first of all, let me thank GFCC for convening this and inviting me to serve as part of this panel with my esteemed colleagues here. Arizona State University is the largest single administration public research university in the country now, largest in terms of enrollment, well over 140,000 students, both on campus, or what used to be on campus, or the version of that, as well as online. And in terms of research expenditures per year, in terms of being the fastest growing research university in the country. A couple of things I think that are driving Arizona State University, and it's at the heart of it exactly what Ted was talking about. There's a lot to unpack there, but exactly what Ted was talking about, and it's been guided by our university design as a whole. So first, the university, Arizona State University, decided itself to behave like an enterprise, to be entrepreneurial, even in the way that it thinks about traditional products and services and the ways that we develop and deliver those products and services. And so there was a real leaning into online, not as a separate, not as an afterthought, not as a thing that we should do because it was, something that might be coming, but as part of actually supporting, developing, dimensionalizing the scholarship of the faculty, and then the reach in terms of the students. So two trends in terms of massification as well as student experience. The same faculty who are conducting the research, who are teaching on campus, were the faculty that were tapped to develop all the online offerings. One example, we have the first ABET accredited electrical engineering online degree program, which started many years ago. Just to look at engineering as one small evidence point, the university went from having an engineering college of about 7,000 students to now having 22,000 students. Think about that, an engineering college in the United States with 22,000 students, and that's driven by the idea of how do we help meet this unmet need of excellence with inclusion and impact at scale. So the design aspirations that the university developed and were guided by is everything from conducting use-inspired research, leveraging our place, being socially embedded, and then valuing entrepreneurship. So to come full circle to this question again, the university went and specifically looked at the way we develop academic programs, the way we deliver these academic programs, the way we support our research, the way we support scholarship, the infrastructure that we have, and the ways that we can actually bring resources in an entrepreneurial fashion. So the university went from having something like a $600 million annual operating expenditure annual budget to something like 3.8 billion now. And that's because we dimensionalized. We were able to bring in many more programs for students. We were able to meet them where they are. And again, without at all diminishing the excellence and the quality of our students, but creating many more opportunities. One last thing I just want to mention is, as one example, I lead entrepreneurship and innovation at the university. And we decided to double down on the idea that there's just only good things will come out of helping people be as entrepreneurial as possible. So we didn't focus only on scalable technology. We focused on scalable technology. We focused on service industry. We focused on food and beverage. We focused on all the different parts of not only things that drive economic development, but that also drive community development. And that's a core part, again, of our identity in terms of, leveraging the place, being socially embedded, taking advantage of all the things internal and external to the university. And that manifests in the way that we organize everything from our organizational charts, how people are hired, who they're reporting to, how they're appointed, as well as partnerships, how we work with industry partners, how we work with the local government, how we work with the federal government. And so this idea of public-private partnerships to maximize and optimize the individual resources that any organization or person may have, and by recombining them and by actually creating opportunities to, for better or for worse, right, bring your best, the potluck party version, right? Not everybody has to bring banana pudding to the potluck party. Everybody should bring what they're best at. And so as a real simple kind of funny way of talking about it, we really looked at where do we have key strengths and assets and individuals as well as organizations, and how do we, by recombining the way we think of organizations and really connecting and collaborating to bring the best of it, and then frankly, again, to optimize the outcomes through that collaboration.
Thank you, Jimmy. So strategy and intention. So this was done by design. That's what we're saying. Yeah. By design. So with the intention that we will be innovative, we will engage, right? Yes. So great examples. I'll leave one question and we will be back. We'll be back to that later, because I think that one of the changes that I personally see, or one of the features that we see at ASU, is that innovation is not just outbound, it's inbound. It's the way how you engage with community and you bring in. That seems to be a key feature. So I'll leave it here, but I would like to go back to that later. Sure. Let's transition to the other, let's say across the Atlantic. Yeah, and maybe Maher, one of the things that we've done in the GFCC, in the space of the GFCC Universal Research Leadership Forum, since we first convened this group of the universities from around the globe back in 2016, we published a report called Convergence and Circulation, that it's connected to, its content is really connected to what Ted and Jimmy mentioned, that this whole notion about working across boundaries, working across sectors, and driving innovation, as you also have the capacity to have people work who have experiences to do that weaving, or who have experiences working in different sectors. You are one of those leaders. You were at CMU and in a research professor capacity. You created tech companies. You worked for UC Berkeley, and you will also work for the Qatar Research Development and Innovation Council, a GFCC member. So what are some of the learnings that you gained working across sectors and working across geographies around the globe that you are taking to Qatar at this point in order to drive innovation and entrepreneurship there?
Well, thank you, Roberto, first for having me at this forum with the esteemed panelists. And thank you for this question. You know, at Qatar Research Development Innovation Council, we sort of have the opportunity, the luxury, I would say, to step back and look at the ecosystem holistically. Qatar is a small country. It's an emerging market, and it's aspiring to become one of the leaders in research, development, and innovation. For multiple reasons. One of them is diversification away from the oil and gas sector, but also because we want to play an important role globally towards the mission of making the world a better place. The three elements you bring to the table, government, industry, and academia and universities, are really sort of the key player in making innovation happen. But we call them a golden triangle. And as you mentioned, I worked on all of these sectors. And one of the things you realize, you start recognizing, is that the reason innovation doesn't progress quick enough is because of gaps and overlaps between the roles that the players in these sectors play. And honestly, in a country like Qatar, where, like you mentioned before, there is wealth, some of those overlaps actually gets exaggerated because everyone wants to do more, but nobody really focuses on their core competency. Now, let's take the example of universities, since we're talking about universities. Traditionally, what are the products of universities? There are two things: knowledge and talent. This hasn't changed and will not change. Your job at a university is to produce knowledge to the world and produce talented people who can actually go and provide solutions. What we know is that, you know, the advantage that we have at Qatar by looking at other people's experiences is understanding that there are the gaps of other people's experiences with the university's outcome, the way they make the product better. There are two gaps. There's a gap of knowledge, where too many students graduate not understanding the real world. They don't understand problems in governments. They don't understand problems in industry. So there's a gap of knowledge. There's also a gap of funding, you know, what's so-called the valley of death. There's so much knowledge out there put in university that there is no takers, if you will, to translate that into innovation and impact. So what that means is that universities can actually do more to fill this gap. They can do more to fill the gap of knowledge for their students by bringing more mechanisms for the students to learn about real world problems and about real government problems. And the universities can actually do more to fund the gaps, to bring the knowledge to more mechanism, more place where the industries now can step in and private sector can step in and take it to impact. Both those two gaps are things that within the ecosystem of Qatar, we can actually address because we learn from other people's experiences and we can work on. One more comment and I will leave it there, just to explain how serious these gaps are. Only recently I read The Fifth Risk by Michael Lewis. It's a fantastic book. I'm over 50 years old. I spent my entire life in the innovation ecosystem and in government and research. And I'm ashamed to say that I had no idea the massive problems that the federal government attack on our behalf as citizens. So I didn't know about it, let alone students at the university. How come there is no mechanism by which over my 50 years of learning, I was never exposed to the kind of problems that the federal government is dealing with on a day-to-day basis that require massive innovation. Meanwhile, we have a tremendous amount of funding and educational resources, and no one knew about these problems.
Thank you, Maher. So my take from what you said is that a critical role for universities to play, it's really to be this role of identifying the gaps that are there where you could act and create more value. Yeah, and in some way shape your toolkits, shape your initiatives to address those. But you also mentioned something that I think is very interesting. That I would say it's not probably the best word to use, but it's an empathy gap in terms of the realities and the problems and the challenge that different stakeholders face. And just think that whatever the role you could play to reduce that gap, as you just mentioned, the challenge that the governments face. How could you translate that to people? So, Pranju, I would like to transition to you, but in doing that, just to invite everybody to share comments and questions here. We have some great questions that are already coming. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Chad. We'll be back to those soon. Pranju, you are an entrepreneur too, right? If I may, I really would like to ask a very personal question. Why did you go to Luxembourg? Yeah, and what are you doing there? And what's needed to drive innovation and entrepreneurship to make people wanting to become entrepreneurs in one of the richest countries in the globe again, but that has a, let's say it's an economic success in some way. So how do you make people really wanting to take risks or new risks? And what's your role in doing that?
Thanks a lot, Roberto. I'm really glad to be here, and really, I think all that I've heard today is really what a lot of this is what we are seeing take place in our university, in our ecosystem across EU. I think this is resonating as well, and I can just double down on this and say that the challenges that the education sector is facing is just going to escalate from here on. And I think COVID has not just shattered the belief that this model is going to stay, but I think it's really, there's a need to innovate. Now, I'll quickly tell you a little bit about why I ended up in Luxembourg. And I think Ted knows this because I learned my entrepreneurial ropes, like get started in the entrepreneurial world with Ted as a Kaufman Fellow in 2009. And at that time, we were trying to create my first company. I took a sabbatical in my PhD, and that was a great success at that time. And I was in Denmark, so not the best place in the world to start a company at that time. And I think still it's becoming one of the best ecosystems in Europe, but the capital gain tax there is one of the highest. So of course, when you call your accountant and say, okay, how does it look? We are going to sell this technology. Hope I have, I can retire or buy something as an apartment for myself. He's like, yeah, you don't know that you're in Denmark, right? I was like, 64% tax. Okay, what do I do? He said, okay, move to Luxembourg. That's what I did. in a short story. But Luxembourg has been doing fantastic in the sense of attracting these kind of companies who are people who are, sitting on highly innovative projects. So an IP-based IP law here in Luxembourg is something which puts Luxembourg always at the top of innovation index across EU. So if you look consistently at the number of patents being filed in the EU, you will find that Luxembourg is at the top. And this is because most of the companies have their headquarters based in Luxembourg. And because of that, Luxembourg's economy has really flourished in the sense that having the headquarters here of these companies allows Luxembourg to also pull in a lot of funds, because all the family offices are practically set up here. So this year alone, I think Luxembourg's, the amount of money that Luxembourg actually kind of just processed went up from, I think, 3.5 trillion to 5 trillion during COVID. So if you imagine Luxembourg is a country probably smaller than most metros in the US as a country, and you're processing about 5 trillion worth of money. So as a country, it's not just rich, but it's also creates a massive challenge for the country in the sense of education, in the sense of how to pursue innovation. So until very recently, so until 15 years back, there was no university in the country. So the most common way for the population of 500,000, the trend was like, find an admission into the best universities around the world, and you should send your kids outside, and they should come back and bring great ideas and innovation back with them. This is still sometimes we feel, and we talk about it jokingly, that most of the red carpets in Luxembourg are outside at the border. and still tends to be the way. So as a university which is very young, I think the challenge here was not about just creating an ecosystem for promoting entrepreneurship innovation. There was a systematic challenge in changing the mindset here of students or young people to think about looking at challenges that the country is facing itself. So I very much agree here with Maher that the government was never, in the sense, open about the challenges that as a country that they were facing. And only when they created this university or created this platform, the locals have now started, sending their kids here. But still, it's about 5%. So for a university, the only university in the country, if you look at the number of Luxembourgish people in the university being less than 5%, it's still a huge way for the university to start making inroads into the Luxembourgish society. And there is still a lot of, let's say, mindset change and risk-taking that needs to come into the society, because if you divide the demographic in the country, most of the locals, based on their nationality, or let's say the origins, they tend to follow the path that their parents typically took, because it's the safest route here. That's why it's also not a surprise that after Qatar University, actually, the Luxembourg University is the second most international university in the world. 95% of people who come here are internationals. So we have about between 6,000 students. We have about 125 nationalities, which is a great for us as the incubator, where we are trying to promote entrepreneurship innovation, create this ecosystem. It's actually the perfect recipe that we could have. Because if you look around every other ecosystem around the world, and I mean the US is a great example, is that immigrants built the whole entrepreneurial ecosystems. Now, if we are succeeding in bringing people, students, high caliber students from all over the world to Luxembourg, they get used to the highest standard of living around the world. So we are second in the world after Singapore, and they don't want to leave. And that is the perfect, let's say, for us, the perfect motivation that we could offer to these students, saying, why don't you start practicing entrepreneurship right from the first day that you enter the university, and think about creating your own job? Because the job sector here is good for certain sectors. The government is putting a lot of efforts in diversifying. So steel was predominantly the most prominent business here, but now they're investing in biotech, they're investing in fintech, they're investing in also automotive, sector. What we are trying to now do here is really promote academic entrepreneurship to make sure that most students, when they engage with us, are leaving with their own jobs. And that's the mindset shift that we're trying to put in place.
So you are working to break a path. And I think that connects with other things that we talked here. But also to, in some way, to recycle capital. You have this incredible stock of capital, but how could you create the systems, the tools that would allow that capital to flow and maybe fuel entrepreneurship? So that's a good problem to have. Georgia, I want to transition to you, and you come with a different perspective. You come from the industry, right? The ATEX stock exchange is a stock exchange. We have companies that are listed. Most of those companies are in traditional industries or sectors, right? And one of the things that you are trying to do in Greece is to drive entrepreneurship and to accelerate other companies into capital markets. For instance, using tools like the Roots Acceleration Program that you talk about. How do you see the connections with the universities? What do you need to turbocharge that acceleration process, and also to let's say enhance your capacity to create new industries and even new sectors in your country?
Well, thank you very much, Roberto. Thank you for the invite. I'm very pleased to be here with you today. I'll start by sharing a little bit about our group, because not everybody knows us. Athens Stock Exchange is 145 years old. It's a public company listed for the last 20 years, and it's the parent of a group here in Greece. Our business is primarily focused in Greece, and obviously our future relies heavily on the Greek economy, how that does, and Greek entrepreneurship. I'm sure you all know that for the last 10 years, Greece has had a very difficult time. The economy was hit very hard. Thankfully, we seem to be out of that, obviously into something else, but we won't talk about that. And what's the imperative here now has been is to grow the economy again and to develop it in a sustainable manner. Okay. As you said, we have the vast majority of large businesses, successful businesses listed here on our exchange. Over the past years, some of them actually became very, very much stronger, having endured a very difficult 10 years. And we also have a very high percentage, very high number of foreign investors. Greece is a very extrovert society. The Greek economy, the Greek businessmen are very extrovert. And our exchange is very extrovert. We have investors from all over the world. And actually, Greece is a favorite investment destination. Everybody sees an awful lot of potential here. And frankly, over the years, when we've met with hundreds of investors face to face, the question has always been, how can we invest? And of course, you know, with prices, valuations being low, that was even more attractive in the last few years. But there is a problem here. And it's not just a Greek thing, it's a European thing. We have mainly small companies, SMEs, medium and small size companies, an awful lot of family businesses, and actually entrepreneurship was on a decline prior to the crisis. And in my view, the worst thing of all was that our talent, and we do have talent, I'm sure you've met Greeks around the world who've done great things. Our universities produce an awful lot of very good academic research individuals and teams, has been going abroad. So we've been losing, it was the brain drain. Everybody was talking about the brain drain. So unemployment here and brain drain, and people going abroad, maybe starting businesses there, but we were obviously not heading in a good direction. So we thought we should use all the resources we have, bridge the gaps, because there are an awful lot of gaps and an awful lot of good reasons why, although there is investment interest, although there is potential in the country, great people, we were not actually seeing any growth and increase in entrepreneurship. And we've created routes. We have to say that GFCC has been with us from the start, helping us leverage their experience and network. And we've tried to actually leverage our central position here in Greece, the fact that we've got access to some of the greatest companies who've joined us in routes, became corporate champions, gave us some of their best people to act as mentors. We got financial advisors on board, some of the great advisory firms, audit and consulting firms. We've got a training program which was built with the CFA Society here in Greece. Actually, ASU is one of our educational partners. And what we created is a community where startups and SMEs can come on board. Of course, we don't just take anybody, we take those who have clearly growth potential and could become interested to investors, because what we aim to do is actually give them access to investment, give them access to the capital markets. capital is a big issue for these businesses. Typically, they rely on bank loans. And as you know, here in Europe, there is a move to deleverage the banks and shift businesses to use the capital markets, trying to somehow go in the direction that the US and the UK are. We're very far from that. So the idea is that they come on board and we get them to learn about the capital markets. We get them to build their capacity to tackle the market, identify their needs, present their investment proposal, and access investors. That's what we're doing. We've already got a group of companies that we've been working with. And frankly, it's amazing to see the energy, the response, the enthusiasm from everyone, and the value that's created, frankly, without any investment other than human contribution and collaboration.
Thank you, Georgia. One quick question for you. How could universities in Greece or from around the globe better work with you to turbocharge that process? Well, what would it be, let's say, the one thing that you would like to have?
We're already, I think, doing a lot of the right things, working more and more closely with Greek universities and universities from abroad. Frankly, it's mostly professors who have given us their time and their knowledge and have helped us and are doing so. I think now with this, I wouldn't say new, but we've now adopted it so widely, this way of being able to use technology to bring us closer. Frankly, I think our teams should never be without someone from academia, someone who can contribute both in evaluating proposals that require that kind of input, mentoring, coaching, and just being part of the team. I think it would be very beneficial to both sides, and we should, I think, aim to have it as a matter of an objective in itself.
Thank you. Great. And I just want to build on what you said, and we have great questions, and I encourage everybody to join the conversation here in Q&A. I will share some of those questions and invite all of you to comment about what's being asked by our colleagues here. But I want to build on what you said, Georgia, and turn to you, Jimmy, with my outbound question, right? And also from there to Pranjul, Maher, and Ted. How do you engage with industry outside of the university boundaries? How do you do that in practice? What are the tools? And maybe if you could also share, do you have any, let's say, benchmarks, any insights from other places around the globe that you would like to apply and use? But how do you do that in practice, maybe to close some of the gaps that we heard here today?
Sure. So let me make the remark that it's my colleague at the university who has a similar function to mine. But so on behalf of my colleague, let me tell you what I know about our corporate engagement strategic partnership strategy. One key thing, it's concerted. It's a coordinated effort. So the idea is, instead of having individual faculty members or individual schools or individual centers, kind of all different approaching who they think might be relevant, the idea is that the university makes it a point to have a coordinated approach. We've got a central team. Again, my colleague leads corporate engagement strategic partnerships. But I think most importantly, we both have in entrepreneurship and innovation a model and in corporate engagement where what we call cross appointments, right? We have people inside of engineering that work directly with knowledge enterprise and entrepreneurship and innovation. We have people inside all of the different academic units that have a responsibility to that discipline, to that organization, but also are able to see cross-sectorally, are able to see pan-university. So entrepreneurship and innovation, as an example, is established as a pan-university resource, as is corporate engagement. That model then allows for us to look inward. What are the assets? What are the aspirations? What are the outcomes we're hoping for? And then be able to bring it into a more centralized, without being a top-down heavy central organization, but really this connect and collaborate model through something called a corporate engagement council. That corporate engagement council shares information. They talk about what's happening with different partners. How are you laddering up from, and most corporations almost always start with, we're looking to hire some interns, right? We're looking to hire some students. And then that kind of graduation of, we've done more together, we trust each other, you've now commissioned research, we're now, co-creating certain things, we're doing things like using facilities together. It turns out the university has a couple of, pieces of specific equipment that's very specific that maybe a small company wouldn't be able to invest in for themselves. So how do we create this recharge model where we are allowed to provide access to not just talent, but also things like resources and facilities? So it is very much this kind of porosity of understanding what each individual party and organization needs, working collaboratively to be able to say, okay, WP Carey, you might bring this, and engineering, you might bring that. The School of Business brings this, engineering brings this. The organizing function or the concierge function, it happens at the corporate engagement level. So there's a variety of ways that the university does that. To add one more piece to this, it's not just university to industry, and this is that kind of triad that we're talking about, this public-private partnership with government as well. There's a number of agencies inside the state of Arizona, as well as federally, that we're looking at things like business locates, right? How important would it be to the region to be able to attract an industry partner of a certain type or of a certain size? So even with the things like our Greater Phoenix Economic Council or our Arizona Commerce Authority, the university plays a key role in terms of being able to be responsive to what that industry partner might be looking for, and to couple that with the strategy overall in terms of how do we get a company to locate or relocate or create a second location in proximity to and because of the relationship with a research university. So it's this coordinated approach in terms of understanding where the key assets are and understanding what's going to be of most benefit. And then frankly, to Maher's point, being responsive to that knowledge gap, right? Really starting to close the idea of this is what happens in academic theory versus this is what happens in the field, in the class, outside the classroom. So it is a deeply coordinated approach, but it's done in a way where it's not a centralized command and control model. It really is a collaborative model.
Thank you, Jimmy. You had mentioned strategy before and design and purpose, intention. And now you have highlighted the need for organizational solutions to materialize that. Pranjul, Maher, how do you do that? Your outreach function, and how do you actively engage and weave, let's say, the innovation ecosystem in your realities? Maybe Maher, if you want to go first.
Well, yes, I will. I will give a specific example of a new thing we tried at UC Berkeley that I think has a lot of applicability to Qatar. Traditionally, again, the corporate engagement with universities were along these two dimensions, knowledge and talent. So industry come and hire students. So there's a mechanism for that, and they are interested in the students. They also hire faculty members as consultants and collaborators. And industry also is interested in the research that comes out of the university. So these sort of two paths have been traditionally cultivated and developed. The one thing I think that hasn't been explored much is around filling that knowledge gap to bringing the industry into the classrooms. And I think the best way to bring them into the classrooms is in entrepreneurship innovation courses. We know that the students who are recently graduated are usually the best startup founders because they have little responsibilities in life. They don't have a mortgage, they don't have a kid, they can take risks. And because of that, we know that some of the most amazing successful startups have been either started by students or dropout. But we also notice that most of these startups are in the consumer space because these are the problems they know. When you're 21-year-old, you don't understand much about the energy market to disrupt the energy market. No matter how many courses you've taken, they're academic courses. But if somehow you figure out a way to educate students who are interested in innovation and entrepreneurship deeply into the problems in the energy market, whether it's the market, whether the energy resources or anything else, then all of a sudden you may end up having startups really in these areas that are disrupting these fields, start by the people who are capable to have that sustainability of drive and resources to be able to disrupt them. So one of the things we try to do at UC Berkeley is create the programs by which it's almost, I call it a venture studio, but a venture studio starting from the students who are saying, hey, I'm interested in innovation entrepreneurship, but I'm sick and tired of doing yet another dating app. Can you educate me on the problems? And now what we can do is go to the industry, the 5G industry, and say, can you spend an intense one semester with a group of students and let them drink from the fire hose about all the problems, so that, and worst case scenario, you will have an excellent person to hire after they graduate. Best case scenario, they can actually come up with new ideas that it takes 10 years for somebody from the industries to come up with these ideas.
Bring the problems in. Yeah.
Bring the problems in. Bring the problems of industry and government into academia, deep, with the students, not with the faculty members.
With the students.
With the students, with the student teams, with specifically a diversified student teams. You put the civil engineer with the computer scientist, with a psych major, with the UI designer, and that cannot happen in a traditional university program because there are departments, and departments have courses and all of these things. So you have to cultivate a new way of learning that cuts across the boundaries of departments, that doesn't have courses and grades associated with them, to bring the industry in so that they can participate in it.
That suggests to me also another opportunity, cross-generational collaboration, bringing people with experience in the market that could share insights on problems with students. But maybe this is something that could make sense. Pranju, over to you. How do you do that? What are the tools and practice that you are using to tap, for instance, into that amazing capital opportunity that you have?
I think I'm going to again echo what Mahar just said. And Mahar, we are doing exactly what you highlighted. So we run here three interesting programs. One of them is called Ideation Camps. So it's run between anywhere from in the physical world used to be a 72-hour challenge, but in the digital COVID times we have now expanded over to a week in the digital world. But the whole idea here is that we bring in students on purpose from across the university, bachelor's, master's, PhD students. They come in without any experience in entrepreneurship innovation, and they are put through grueling 72 hours where we call them that you're going to live a life of an entrepreneur. And the whole idea here is from the moment they register, we ask them to think about what are their strengths and try to put them into complementary teams. So practically every team will have somebody who's strong in finance, somebody who's strong in marketing, somebody who's a hacker who can build like programs and algorithms on the go. And then there will be somebody who's kind of good in the customer experience and trying to get feedback. Once these teams come together, we bring in what you are highlighting, the industry experience, really pulling in the industry and innovation. So at every event that we organize, we have about 200 corporate executives, CEOs, entrepreneurs, accountants, government executives, the unemployment bureau, practically everybody from the ecosystem comes in and works with these students and helping them identify problems worth solving on the first days, but eventually helping them shift through a whole range of solutions that they've come up with and finding them, narrowing the funnel for them to something that could be executed. So this is something we've been running for last 3 years, and that's resulted already in about 16 companies. 2 of them last year, one of them was this year's Coup de Cour, so like the best young entrepreneur, like young startup. Second one just received funding from the GMO of Skype just before it was sold out to Microsoft. So like really groundbreaking solutions. Now, what we're doing second is, and during COVID times, what we realize is that sometimes industries have so many problems of their own, they're not so easy to pull into ecosystems for a longer engagement. 72 hours, asking them to come in for a couple of hours and mentor student startups, that's okay. But when you want to actually ask them to work together with this kind of teams, that's always then a huge challenge because they don't have internal processes to make this possible. So during COVID, what we did is we launched a new concept called Build Your Own Internship. And the goal here was that we created similar kind of teams again, but they were going to do an internship remotely with any companies that they wanted to. So we told students, like, because we had a huge bunch of students who had lost their internships, they were all completely disheartened, not sure before their graduation if they'll get the grades that they're looking for, what kind of thesis to write. We said, forget about the companies for a second. Imagine the dream company that you would like to have done the internship with. Spend the first two weeks, 3 weeks learning about their competition and what are the challenges they are facing in the market. Come up with a series of solutions on how they can tackle those challenges. And let's then go there to those companies and say, these are the bunch of solutions that we can offer you. You don't need to pay us. You don't even need to supervise us. If you want to, maybe sometimes somebody from your teams can pop in and give us some guidance and feedback. So we did that with 6 teams right in the middle of COVID, and that resulted in 4 new companies where already they are engaging with this with the corporates who actually were basically the solutions were built for. And now these corporates are saying, okay, we really like what you're doing. Can we work more closely? So we kind of flipped the whole model and said, let the students do their work on their own, and then eventually the companies will come in. And the last piece is really the government. And for that, I think what is really working here in Luxembourg is that we were among the last countries in Europe, very conservative, completely opposed to change. In fact, it's the only country in the world that is an administration for administrative reforms. And so it's a huge challenge, but now the new government is really, because of COVID, they realized that they had a huge gap to catch up with. And now government has opened up a lot of GovTech labs where our students are really participating at every intersection, trying to figure out how to bring in digitalization, how to change every process inside out and make the government, it's almost like building the government 2.0 in Luxembourg. And it's happening right now, and our students are really participating in HODES because they really see that they have a huge role to play here.
Thank you. Ted, how the different ideas and examples that we heard about here today connect to what you have been seeing? Not just the research that you led and that you mentioned in the beginning, but your own practice as a researcher, as an entrepreneur, as someone who has been working with entrepreneurs. What are maybe some of the new models that you see coming up that could address this series of gaps that we hear about?
I think there are two ways you can approach it, Roberto. I honestly think that we are entering in what could be one of the highest expansion periods for human knowledge in human society. I think we're in the early days of knowing how to apply the availability we now have to communicate like we are today on this video conference globally, that the finest and most differentiated minds, the most diverse minds can come together now in very seamless approaches that would, maybe harness potential that we've yet to realize. I think, I would argue that higher ed has a obligation to step up to the challenge, to actually pioneer these models as a way to advance human knowledge, not only creation, but translation, application.
We lost him, huh?
Ted, we lost your audio.
We lost your audio, Ted. Yeah, you are muted. Now you are muted. Oh, you are muted, please. And
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, you are back.
So I do believe that we're entering, I think, one of the most exciting periods of time in human history. And if you were to argue what percentage of capacity is being used based on the technology we have just today, I would put that number well below 5%. Think about all the unrealized potential that we could build by thinking more broadly about how we generate knowledge and translate that knowledge for human use. I'm very ambitious about the future of where we're going.
So maybe what we could do now, we have amazing questions here. I want to read some of those questions and see who would want to contribute. I know there's a dialogue going on online, and some of you have already answered that. So one of the questions that we got here, and thanks for that, Jerry, it's about how can we actually have people buying change, right? So professors, faculty, how can we, when you're trying to implement new models, to draw innovative models, what's the secret to have people buying in and being part of that and not just resistant? Another question that we have here, it's about universities themselves. So Chad, thanks for asking that. But do you really see that universities are at the risk of being shut down, those who don't adapt? Is that a reality or not? Yeah, so will some universities fail because they're not able to do what you mentioned here, right? Well, we have a question about metrics. How could we really measure this type of industry, university, government engagement that we talked about that? How do you measure that coming from business or coming from the university side? So those are some of the things that we heard here today. I'll be back to questions, but I really wanted to open to see if any one of you would like to comment on that.
Roberto, just briefly on this question of will some universities fail? I think we've already seen it, right? We've already seen some smaller colleges and some real financial constraints and real demand generation constraints. And how do you keep up an entire operation of something when the demand for it is changing? So I think the short answer is yes. In terms of the longer answer, for sure, I think, some of what Ted was talking about earlier in terms of some of the characteristics, we're already seeing the need for syndication. We're already seeing this idea of buy versus build. How much capacity can you continue to build inside of a single institution and then try to hoard all that capacity versus trying to syndicate it out and make it more available for everything, for operational efficiency all the way through, speed to market when it comes to actually transferring and sharing knowledge. So I think for sure there's going to be this continued evolution. Now, the last thing I wanted to just comment on briefly, Jerry Halton and I actually had the opportunity to work together at New York University, or what's now the School of Engineering for New York University. In terms of incentives, there's push and pull. There's going to be some degree to which you say that, you're not going to necessarily bring everybody along, but how do you both create the incentives to bring people in as well as create the environment that then further attracts? I see another colleague, Sara Buisas from University of Texas A&M actually, that wrote in as well. So we know this for a fact, right? So top down kind of bludgeoning people, making them that they have to, that it's not going to work. It's exactly what Pranjal talked about. You build a better mousetrap that actually builds better outcomes and that is more productive in terms of everything from research sponsorship dollars to even dimensionalization of the types of publications and the types of outputs that come out of it. And what we're seeing is that there's increasingly, especially at a place like ASU, where you created an environment that celebrates, that highlights, that puts resources in, that brings additional resources through this model. It's the reward system. The reward for doing it this way is that your students are having a more enriched experience. We're seeing more startups coming out of the student population as well as the faculty population. We're seeing, industry partners as well as, everything from local and state government agency partners coming to us first more. The fact is we're not being left behind when other organizations are talking about doing large, interesting, potentially moonshot type ideas. So there is a virtuous cycle that gets created from this, creating the environment where success can look very different, and there can be many different types of success. That success then gets celebrated, amplified. More people want to have a part of that. So there is this really nice virtuous cycle. Again, it's not for everybody, but the more we create an environment that invites people in to come do this, as well as recognizes, celebrates, incentivizes, we're seeing, certainly in the 5 years I've been at ASU, there's more volunteer activity happening than kind of nudging activity, which used to be maybe the more of the default 10 years ago. So I think it's yes, incentivize and create environments, pull people along, and understand that for some number of people, it may not be what they're going to do, but they will get left behind.
So fail is a reality.
Totally.
1 second. So fail is a reality. And what we're saying is this combination of, let's say, an intentional model and an emergent one. you create incentives, and along the way, you see more and more that as an emerging component. But that can be engineered. That's what we're saying.
That's right.
Ted, over to you.
I was just going to mention, I believe the unit of analysis of research has now gone from more broad concepts to much more discrete and specific purpose-built concepts that are around problem solving. I've been watching what's happening, for instance, in public health, for instance, in Africa, and how, for instance, an HIV project is now getting hyper-specific around a specific set of blocking questions. The run for clean water, I'm seeing what's happening there. Anti-malarial solutions. What we're seeing with the human genome. I would argue space is now opened up to a whole new set of specific questions. And you know, in the pre-cloud environment that we lived in, we were trying to understand the glossary of problems. Now we have direct access to the problem itself. And what motivates people would be getting specifically into that problem statement and then building partnerships with the folks that can actually affect change around that problem. So it's specialized, but it's also more diverse. And we're bringing global networks together for purposes of solving real problems. Again, we're early days. We're very experimental. It's messy. I think there's still some substantial equity questions in terms of even participation. I think there still is a major have and have not type of thing going on in our world. You know, it's clear globally, right? I'm speaking the obvious. But as it relates to linking talent globally, we have such great opportunities to now affect change across the globe. I saw innovation in India, I've seen innovation in Brazil, I've seen innovation in Iceland around the same topical research question. And that gives me a lot of hope.
So, and your hope in some way is connected to my hope that we have opportunities to connect globally. So thanks for sharing that. So Pranjul, Maher, Georgia, any insights on the things we will see higher education fail if it doesn't change? Is that happening? How about creating this incentive in schemes to incentivize the type of initiatives and behavior that the three of you were talking about?
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry.
Georgia, first.
Did you address it to me? I'm sorry, yeah. I think actually I will agree with what was said before. Universities are businesses and they need to take this big leap into the new role they are going to have to fulfill. I don't believe that we will be sitting in classrooms in large numbers, even at undergraduate level in the future. So they have to see how they can serve that segment of their customers, to put it very in business terms. At the same time, older people who are working or not working need to reskill, and there's a huge opportunity there. And I think they shouldn't let that opportunity go. Universities that can do it, I think they could probably grow stronger and become more influential. Those who stick with the old model will have the future that some had in other industries. I believe the media and others were mentioned already. You know, it happens everywhere, and I don't see how universities could be any different.
Pranjul, Maher, quick comments on this. We have just a few minutes.
No, I think we're already starting to see the trends. I think universities in COVID times who have not managed to adapt very quickly to digital education and like create content which was in line with what the students were expecting, have seen massive attrition rates. Internally in the university as well, we see that from course to course there is a difference. From courses having 70% attrition rate to courses actually gaining more students. Because they could actually take more than what they could take in their classroom sizes. So I think we are seeing all of this, and I think these trends are just going to be more and more clearer during this year. And I think universities will have to go back and really evaluate what's going to happen. What is very interesting, I think, and that's a research paper that just came out today, and I think that's a fantastic work done by Imperial. They looked at academic entrepreneurship over the last 10 years. And what they found is that professors from the universities who engaged in some form of entrepreneurship themselves after their immersion, they had 10 times more productivity in their research outcomes as well as impact. And that's where we need to move to. And I think in Luxembourg, luckily, our National Research Foundation is very proactive, and the head of the foundation is also leading the foundations across EU. And now they are putting more emphasis on impact as part of the decision making on which researchers should get the funding.
Amazing, 10 times, amazing number. Maher, quick insights.
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, last comment is more a cautionary note, which is, you know, again, the focus traditionally for universities should stay on their main two products, talent and knowledge, right? So in the creativity has to come, sort of the innovation has to come in how do we prepare better talented people to the workforce, and how do we produce better knowledge that is more capable of moving towards impact. And I mentioned that is because, you know, right now we live in a world where there is a massive gold rush around, you know, startups and innovation and all of these things. And I see universities starting to get into funding startups and using startups as metrics for you know, and I personally feel this is a mistake. What you need to focus on is the capabilities of the students you graduate. You don't track how many successful startups, because most likely a startup that comes right out of a university to be successful, maybe it happens, but it's more luck. The real truly successful startups that change the world happen because there's a founder that failed 3 or 4 times and continued to do it because he had the capabilities to do it. He learned what it takes to do it. So the focus should not be on a group of students successfully producing a startup, but getting into a startup so that you can learn, you know. So the talent is important, and that's one of your product. And the more you diversify the kind of knowledge you build into the talented workforce, the more you make them appropriate for the workforce of today. And the knowledge you produce, you know, universities are never going to stop doing that deep scientific research that they've always been good at, because that is needed. But there's also a cross-discipline kind of knowledge that universities can come together and produce that can make the move from knowledge to commercialization a lot faster, because there's that collaboration between multiple disciplines.
Thank you, Maher. And this really connects to some of the questions that we got here about the mix between basic and applied research, knowledge creation and translation. I think that connects to that. So we're approaching the end of our session. So what I wanted to do is give 30 seconds to each one of you to a final word. And my question, if you could address, would be if you could share one recommendation for universities to future-proof what does innovation bias or focus, what that would be. Who wants to go first?
I'll throw out the idea that you got to try a lot of different things. It doesn't mean that you have to fund them all at, you know, millions of dollars. You don't need lots of resources. You've got to say yes to a lot of different models, a lot of different things, and then provide opportunity for people to try things, right? What would it look like if we had a 3-school degree in innovation and venture development, which we do at Arizona State University, with engineering, business, and design actually coming together? Like, they went to the provost and they said, this is how we're going to do it. And this is how we're going to handle registration. And this is how we'll handle tuition share between 3 different schools. And so I think the idea that you try a lot of different things, again, mostly it doesn't require lots of money to, you know, stand up a few events, stand up a few meetups, bring in a few industry partners, have a few mentors coming in. And then good ideas have a way of attracting funding. You show some good early outcomes, you show some good early impacts, and then from there, be able to talk about what we tried and what we now need to scale this. Same as any kind of other startup, right? You've got to prove that there's a market appetite for it and that there's a way to sustain it. So
experimentation as a way of doing business. Okay. Ted?
This is probably the hardest question you've given to answer. And I got to tell you, I'm struggling here because the overlaying issue is that universities do see themselves as kind of P&L organizations or corporations or companies or what have you. And I think that's flawed. You know, universities are really knowledge creation sources. Their basic science and basic research is actually a core competence of the university. So Then I think about, okay, how is that going to be funded in the future? I don't believe that, our society will defund basic research. I just don't believe that'll happen. But I think I look at the financial patterns that have occurred, and I'm looking specifically at the United States. And I did an analysis of all the university endowments that have grown, in many cases to billions of dollars for a given institution. But the only university that could sustain its operations through its endowment today is Princeton University. That's because it's not a very large institution. It could sustain itself continuously with its own endowment. Almost every other university relies very heavily on research funding for its long-term sustainability. And that research funding comes in two forms: funding for basic research and applied research. I think it's going to be contingent on the universities to make the tie between their basic research agenda and how it's going to result in real improvement of the human condition. So I do believe that that connection has to be there. At the same time, I think we have to nurture the brilliance of innovators and make sure that there's room for basic research, because that's where society advances. These are very complex problems. And I think that we're going to be making a lot of mistakes over the next 5 years. But I think that if we harness some of this opportunity, we could leapfrog where we were only 10 years ago. So I would lean into the future. That's the way I would leave you.
So I think what you mentioned is we need to learn from this process. So really highlight the knowledge creation component, but we need to learn from this whole process. So
no question, and we're going to learn from one another, and we're all experimenting with different models. And I believe that by coming together and also encouraging more porous relationships with other sectors of the economy, the university doesn't have to do everything. It can't. And it really needs to now understand what it is, how it can be helpful depending on the nature of the institution, and then specialize in the areas that they are truly competent, and discard probably the things where you're reasonably mediocre.
A variety of models. Maher.
Jeff Bezos built an empire by focusing on a customer. Steve Jobs built an empire by focusing on a product. Universities are the only industry where the product and the customer are the same thing. It's the student. They make their money from the students, and they produce a student as a product. So whatever you do, whatever you take, if you keep focusing on this, it's a luxury to have your student and product be the same thing. If you keep focusing on that, then you will do well. If you start getting distracted, I appreciate research, I appreciate innovation, I appreciate industry collaboration, I appreciate all of that. But you're doing all of that for one purpose, which is your product, who is your client. And I've gone through 3 universities. There's only one of them that I'm connected to at this age. And it's the one that treated me well when I was a student. The other ones, I don't care about.
The student at the center, Pranju.
I would like to, I think everything is great. I think we're going to enter a very turbulent time in the terms that globally, most universities are going to try to adapt to the current times, because it has really disrupted the way education was imparted. So like the basic classroom structure has been disrupted. What is key, and what we are trying to really focus on, and I think that's something we've learned through our experience, is that the people or the students at the core of this are very, very agile. They are so flexible. And I think at some point, I think we need to have them have a much more engaging role in deciding how the education in future has to be. I think from our let's say, scope and limits of what we have experienced, we might not be able to crack the model. So what we are really pushing for, and that's something I'm currently preparing to launch very quickly, is called Dissolve the Box Model. So it's one of our bestseller books. And the idea is that we are all living in mental cages that we are created by what we've experienced. And this mental cages pushes us to create more boxes for future people. And I think for the next generation, I think what needs to happen a lot more, and this is really a need for universities now, more than focusing on specific sector innovation, entrepreneurship, is to give them life skills, because they are completely they feel the university model at the moment is failing them on that, and they don't have the foundation on which they can get education. So we're trying to build this here, and that of course is dissolving the box to think that I need to be this or this or that, but helping them learn in a completely new way. And then the university just is providing the skeleton to empower them to do that.
Provide frameworks, soft skills, life skills, that you said. Georgia, what's your take coming from business?
Well, I would say that two things really come to my mind. One is you take good care of your existing customers. And I think the youth of today, especially post-COVID, will probably demand another way of delivery of knowledge. So there I would use digital means, I would use more modern means. My daughter is in the first year at university, and frankly, I'm not so impressed with the delivery. It reminds me too what I experienced too much, and I don't like that. And also, I think universities should look at the opportunity to have new customers. There's a huge number of mature people out there who need to reskill, who I think are now a lot more aware of the need to learn. And they can deliver knowledge to them anywhere in the world in a way that is so much easier, so much more flexible. And, that's a huge opportunity.
Thank you. And thank you all. So my takeaway from this is change is happening. It will even accelerate. In order to address the things that we heard here today, we need to elevate the discussion. It has to be about strategy, but we need to translate that into organizational solutions, and incentives and are chief for that. But we also need new tools. And in terms of new tools, bringing the outside world in is chief, and tools that could really make that happen, with this notion that we need to find a ways to, we'll see a variety of models, but find a ways of mingling different sectors and, let's say, dissolving boundaries that are here. So that's what I learned from you today. It was really a pleasure to have all of you joining and sharing your realities and comments here, Georgia, Jimmy, Ted, Pranjul, and Maher. Before we go, two things. We are taking a group picture, so please look at the camera. You don't see a camera, but I bet you can see a screen. So let's do that. And three short announcements for those who are in attendance here today. On February the 9th, for GFCC members only, GFCC and members and fellows, our colleague Chad Evans, Executive Vice President, the Council on Competitiveness and Treasurer of the GFCC, will present during our monthly call about competing in the next economy, and potentially some connections with the agenda of the new administration in US. Second thing, please stay tuned. Check the GFCC website for updates. We'll be sharing there the research, the material that Ted Zoller and his team have created. So please check that out. And third, we are interviewing universities from across the globe in the GFCC as part of our University Research Leadership Forum initiatives. We have interviewed more than 30 universities. We'll publish a report with the lessons learned about what's happening now and maybe some of the future trends for universities. So please stay tuned. I hope we can be in touch, and it was a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Roberto. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.